Chapter 1. The Awakening in Filth. The sky above the hive world of Eterna Secundus cracked open, revealing the bleeding wound of reality. But down here in the crushing depths of the underhive, the sky was nothing more than a myth, a forgotten dream suffocated by miles of ferrocrete and sorrow. There was only the dripping ceiling of corroded plasteel and the weeping sores of industrial waste. Amidst mountains of refuse that stretched like jagged mountain ranges, a sarcophagus of ancient design hissed. It was not a holy relic of the Ministorum, nor a blessed machine of the Mechanicus. It was something older, something buried by time. The lid of the stasis pod blew off with the scream of depressurizing gas of violent birth in the graveyard of a city. A figure spilled out, coughing up the freezing fluid of preservation, naked against the biting cold of a dying world. Gaius Julius Caesar gasped, his lungs burning with air that tasted of sulfur promethium and the decay of a billion souls. He clawed at the muck, his fingers finding purchase on jagged scrap metal. Where was the curia? Where was the marble of Rome? The darkness was absolute, broken only by the flickering, sickly luminescence of toxic fungi growing on the wet walls. The roar of the city above sounded like the grinding teeth of titans, a ceaseless rhythmic pounding that vibrated through the floor. Pluto Caesar rasped, his voice, unused for millennia, cracking like dry parchment. "Have you claimed me at last?" He tried to stand, his muscles screaming from the atrophy of eons. But there was no dignity here. No judges of the underworld to weigh his soul. Only the smell of ozone and rotting meat. This was not the afterlife. This was a grave that had forgotten to bury its dead. He wiped the slime from his eyes, his vision adjusting to the gloom. Shadows detached themselves from the walls of refuse. They were hunched, twisted mockeries of the human form, their skin pale and ulcerated eyes glowing with the faint, feral light of mutation. Scavengers of the depths. They chattered in a debased, guttural dialect of low Gothic, clicking their teeth at the sight of fresh, unmutated flesh. Caesar stood. He was naked, shivering, and unarmed, yet his posture shifted instantly. The politician vanished. The legate remained. He scanned the terrain with the cold calculation of a predator. Mud for traction. A narrow choke point between two rusted bulkheads. A length of solid iron rebar lying near his feet. He did not pray to the god emperor, for he knew no such deity. He did not call upon Mars. He calculated the odds. The first creature lunged, a blur of claws and filth. Caesar stepped aside, a micro-movement of perfect economy, and brought the iron bar down. There was a wet, sickening crunch as the mutant's skull collapsed inward. It was not a brawl. It was an execution. The creature fell without a sound, twitching in the oily puddle. The others hesitated, sensing a sudden shift in the atmosphere. They were beasts, but they recognized the aura of a killer. Caesar did not wait for them to regroup. He advanced. The rust-eaten metal in his hand became a gladius. He moved with the ruthlessness of a man who had conquered Gaul, dismantling the savages with cold industrial precision. Thrust. Parry. A strike to the throat that crushed the windpipe. A blow to the knee that shattered bone. Violence was the universal language of history, and Caesar spoke it fluently. Within moments, the scavengers lay broken at his feet, their dark blood mixing with the chemical rain that had begun to fall from the leaking pipes above. Silence returned to the scrap heap, save for the hissing of acid rain on the cooling corpses. Caesar dropped the bloody iron bar, his chest heaving. He looked up past the dripping pipes toward the crushing weight of the ceiling that blocked out the stars. His eyes locked onto a piece of debris half buried in the mud. It was stamped with a symbol, a two-headed eagle, twisted, stylized metal wings spread in a display of dominion. The Aquila. A pang of horror struck him sharper than any assassin's dagger. This was not a foreign land. This was the legacy of his species. He wrapped himself in a tattered, heavy tarp he scavenged from the dead, the fabric rough against his skin like a toga of shame. The galaxy had gone mad. Civilization had rotted into a corpse that refused to die, held together by ignorance and iron. Fear attempted to seize his heart, and the sheer scale of this nightmare was enough to break a lesser man. But he strangled the fear with arrogance. If the world was broken, it required an architect. If it was savage, it required a general. Rome has fallen, he whispered to the shadows, his eyes hardening into flint, reflecting the distant red glow of a furnace. Or has it become this monster? He looked at the pipe in his hand, feeling its weight. It was a crude tool, but it was a start. It was a weapon. I shall build it again, he vowed to the silence of the underhive. Brick by bloody brick. Chapter 2. The 10th Legion of the Underhive. Zone Z4 was a festering wound in the belly of the hive city, a labyrinth of corrugated iron and desperation. Where the sun was a rumor and the emperor was a lie told to starving children. Here, power was measured in caloric intake and blunt trauma. The Iron Skulls gang ruled this domain, their authority stamped onto the flesh of the populace with heavy boots and crude solid slug autopistols. They controlled the nutrient paste dispensers, the only source of sustenance for 10,000 souls. It was a crude monopoly, brutal and effective. Caesar sat atop a pile of discarded ventilation ducts wrapped in his scavenged tarp, watching the scene below with the unblinking gaze of a raptor. For 3 days he had observed. He had not eaten yet. His hunger was a distant, dull ache compared to the burning need to organize the chaos before him. He watched the gang members beat a crippled worker for spilling a ladle of gray sludge. He watched the crowd cringe, eyes downcast, paralyzed by the habit of servitude. Discipline, Caesar muttered, his voice a low grind against the ambient industrial hum. They lack formation. They lack a standard. He had spent the last cycle repairing a discarded Voxcaster unit found in the trash. It was a clumsy, ugly device, blessed with the intricate prayers of the machine god. But Caesar had simply rewired the corroded coils with steady hands. He did not know the prayers, but he understood the flow of energy. He understood that a voice, if amplified correctly, could hit harder than a ballista. He strapped the heavy unit to his chest, the speaker grill resting over his heart. It was time to cross the Rubicon of the underhive. He descended. He did not sneak. He walked down the main thoroughfare, the mud sucking at his scavenged boots. The crowd parted, confused by this figure who walked with the stride of a conqueror in the clothes of a beggar. The Iron Skulls gang leader, a brute named Korg, whose face was a landscape of scars and cybernetic grafting, laughed as Caesar approached the distribution center. Korg raised a heavy stubber, leveling it at Caesar's chest. Lost trash, Korg grunted, his voice amplified by cheap external speakers. Kneel or become meat. Caesar did not kneel. He adjusted the gain on his Voxcaster. Feedback shrieked a high-pitched wail that made the gangers wince and clutch their ears. Then silence. When Caesar spoke, his voice was not his own. It was the boom of thunder trapped in a box, a baritone command that rattled the sheet metal walls of the slum. I see no men here. Caesar announced, his amplified voice echoing off the vaulted, rusting ceiling. I see only sheep, and the butchers who fatten you for the slaughter. The crowd gasped. Korg blinked, stunned by the audacity. Before the ganger could pull the trigger, Caesar continued, turning his back on the gun to address the shivering masses. It was a calculated risk, a display of supreme contempt for his enemy. You starve because you allow it. You bleed because you accept it. Look at them, Caesar gestured to the 20 armed thugs. 20 men. You are 10,000. Do the math of survival citizens of Rome. The word Rome meant nothing to them, yet the way he said it made it sound like a promise of paradise. "I do not promise you food," Caesar roared the voxcaster, pushing the limits of its capacitors. "Any master can throw scraps to a dog. I promise you dignity. I promise that if you die today, you die standing." The atmosphere shifted. The fear in the air curdled into something volatile rage. Korg roared, pulling the trigger, but the gun jammed, perhaps a malfunction, perhaps the luck of the devil. In that split second of hesitation, the spell of fear broke. The crowd did not run. They looked at the rocks at their feet. They looked at the pipes in their hands. "Charge!" Caesar commanded, pointing a finger like a spear. It was not a riot. It was an avalanche. The starving masses surged forward, a tidal wave of emaciated bodies crashing into the armored line of the iron skulls. Caesar stood amidst the violence, calm as a statue. He did not fight like a brawler. He directed. "Left flank push, secure the high ground. Do not stop until they are broken." He grabbed a terrified youth by the shoulder, shoving him into a gap in the line. "Hold this line, soldier. Hold it with your life." When the dust settled, the iron skulls were gone, torn apart by the very hands that they had enslaved. The distribution center was secured. The people covered in blood and grime looked to Caesar, waiting for the looting to begin, waiting for the chaos. But Caesar climbed atop the nutrient tank. "Form ranks," he bellowed. "We do not loot. We inventory. You distribute the water. You secure the weapons. We are not a mob. We are the 10th Legion." And for the first time in millennia, amidst the filth of the 41st millennium, the rhythmic stomp of disciplined feet began to echo. Chapter 3. The Gallic Wars in Microcosm. The war for the lower strata was no longer a riot. It was a campaign. In the suffocating tunnels of the underhive, where territory was usually measured in meters of sewage pipe, Gaius Julius Caesar drew maps. He used chalk scavenged from industrial waste to sketch complex lines of circumvallation on the rusted floor of his command bunker. The 10th Legion, a motley collection of former dregs, mutants, and factory serfs, watched with a mixture of confusion and religious awe. They were used to charging screaming into gunfire, fueled by combat stims and despair. Caesar taught them to wait. He taught them that patience was a weapon sharper than any chainsword. Their target was the bastion of St. Chiodris, a decommissioned planetary defense force armory now held by the Red Vipers, a drug cartel turned warlord state. The Vipers possessed heavy bolters and the high ground. Caesar had numbers and geometry. He did not order a suicidal frontal assault. Instead, for 3 days, his engineers men, who previously only knew how to break things, dug. They sapped the foundations of the Vipers' barricades, tunneling through layers of compacted trash and ferrocrete, guided by Caesar's precise calculations on structural integrity. The Vipers laughed from their walls, firing blindly into the dark, unaware that the ground beneath them was being hollowed out. When the attack finally commenced, it was not with a roar, but with a rhythmic crack hiss of disciplined last fire. Caesar walked the line of his shallow trench completely exposed, ignoring the stray rounds sizzling past his head. He carried a baton of steel tapping the shoulders of his shivering riflemen. "Do not spray the light," he commanded, his voice cutting through the din. "The weapon has no recoil. It is a pointer of death. Point, click, kill." He forced them to fire in volleys, treating the high-tech laser guns like the Pila of old. Snap hiss, snap hiss. The continuous erratic beams of the enemy scattered harmlessly against cover, while the concentrated volleys of the 10th Legion punched through the Vipers' weak points with surgical blinding efficiency. The Vipers' morale broke before their walls did. When the sappers detonated the charges, collapsing the main gate in a cloud of dust and pulverized rock, the enemy fled in a panic that no narcotic could suppress. Caesar mounted a captured sentinel walker, a bipedal machine of war that he found clumsy but effective as a mobile podium. The localized voxcasters on the machine whined to life, broadcasting his voice across the smoldering battlefield. He looked down at the burning fortress, at the thousands of kneeling enemies surrendering their weapons, and at his own troops standing in perfect formation amidst the carnage. Vini, the voice boomed, shaking the dust from the ceiling rafters. The legionaries slammed their rifle butts into the metal floor in unison. Thud! Vidi Caesar intoned his face, illuminated by the flickering red strobe of an emergency light, his expression carved from marble. Thud. Vici. The final word hung in the humid air, heavier than the smog. There were no cheers, no chaotic celebration. There was only the terrifying silence of absolute obedience. Far above kilometers into the spire-top precinct of the Adeptus Arbites, a cogitator rune blinked from green to amber. The statistical anomaly in Sector ZID-4 had crossed the threshold from civil unrest to organized insurrection. The eagle had finally opened its eye. Chapter 4. The Scrutiny of the Eagle. High above the choking smog layer in the crystalline spires, where the air was scrubbed clean and scented with synthetic lilac, planetary governor Hestia Vane stared at a data slate with the irritation of a woman interrupted during her third afternoon feast. The numbers did not make sense. For centuries, the output of industrial sector Z4 had been a flat line of mediocrity, punctuated by inevitable declines due to gang warfare mutation outbreaks or simple entropy. But for the last standard month, the graph had spiked. Mineral extraction up 300%, munitions assembly up 450%, corpse starch recycling efficiency optimal. It is an error, Vane drawled, tossing a grape into her mouth. A sensor malfunction, or the cogitator spirits are drunk on poor voltage again. She gestured languidly to the robed figure standing in the shadows of her chambers, Magos Biologis Zelos, of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The tech priest did not eat sleep or feel irritation. His mechadendrites twitched with binary curiosity. Negative Governor Xylos rasped his voice, a synthesized grind of static. The machine spirits do not lie. The output is physical, real. Someone in the Underhive has optimized the sacred kinematics of the manufactorums. This efficiency is unnatural. Xylos descended into the depths, not with a retinue of warriors, but with a procession of servitors bearing censers and holy unguents. He expected to find a sorcerer speeding up time, or perhaps a darker power fusing flesh with metal to work without rest. What he found in Sector Z4 was far more terrifying to his dogmatic mind. The factories were silent, not the silence of death, but the silence of perfect synchronization. The grinding screech of metal on metal, the song of the machine in pain that the Mechanicus called holy labor, was gone. In the center of the main processing floor, amidst the rhythmic hum of pistons moving like the heartbeat of a sleeping god, sat the man they called Imperator. He was not chanting. He was not applying the sacred oils of friction to the external casing while reciting the litany of ignition. He was holding a rag. A simple, filthy rag. He was wiping grit from a gear assembly. Beside him, a pile of Scroll's actual paper, not data slates, was covered in geometric diagrams and supply timetables written in a sharp, angular hand. Heresy Xylos screeched his Vox grill, modulating to a frequency of pure outrage. You touch the Omnissiah's avatars with unblessed hands. You silence their holy screams. Caesar looked up from his ledger. He did not flinch at the sight of the cyborg monstrosity. He merely dipped his quill into a pot of ink made from soot and water. The machine screamed because it was in pain. Priest Caesar replied, his voice calm, cutting through the tech priest's static like a blade. I removed the friction. Now it hums. It is grateful. Xylos advanced a mechadendrite, snapping forward to scan the device Caesar had been tending. The readout scrolled across the Magos's internal retina efficiency 99.8%. Heat generation minimal. Spirit mood placid. It was impossible. No prayers had been offered. No incense burned. You reduced the divine mystery to mechanics. Xylos stammered, his logic circuits looping in a panic. This is tech heresy. You cannot simply repair without the ritual of pacification. Caesar stood wiping his ink-stained hands on his tunic. He walked around the desk, looking at the tech priest, not with fear, but with a pity that burned worse than plasma. You pray for the machine to work. I clean it, I oil it, I align it. The result is that my soldiers have ammunition and yours have prayers. Caesar leaned in, his eyes, dark and ancient. Rome was not built on magic creature of iron. It was built on logistics. Tell your masters that. Tell them the output remains high as long as I remain in charge. Xylos retreated, his sensors recording every detail of the Imperator's face. As he ascended back to the spire, the Magos composed a priority message to the local Inquisition conclave. He hesitated over the classification code. Was it chaos? No. Was it Xenos influence? Unlikely. He selected a code that had not been used in this sector for 1,000 years. Code malign logic. The message was short. There is an intelligence in the Underhive. It does not worship the machine. It understands it, requesting immediate purgation. Chapter 5. Crossing the Rubicon. The Bridge of Penance was a gargantuan spine of adamantium, connecting the squalid darkness of the Underhive to the twilight of the Midhive. It was a kill zone, 500 meters of open metal grate, suspended over a bottomless abyss of smog and ventilation shafts. On the upper side, the enforcers of the Adeptus Arbites stood in a phalanx of riot shields and shock mauls backed by heavy bolter emplacements. They were the wall of the law, faceless behind ceramic visors, waiting to crush the uprising of the filth. Below them, the 10th Legion assembled. They did not scream or beat their chests like the rabble of old. They stood in silence, their scavenged armor polished to a dull sheen, their lasguns held at port arms. Governor Hestia Vane's voice crackled over the gargoyle-mouthed speakers, lining the bridge, shrill and distorted by panic, masked as authority. Disperse vermin. By the order of the Imperial Senate, she corrected herself, stumbling over archaic terms. By the holy decree of the planetary governorship, you are declared traitoris perdita. Cross this line and you forfeit your souls to the warp. There is no mercy for the unclean. The enforcers racked the slides of their bolters, a sound like 1,000 heavy doors slamming shut. The threat was absolute. To step onto the bridge was to invite obliteration. Caesar stood at the very edge of the abyss. He looked at the expanse of metal before him. In his mind's eye, the rusted grating vanished, replaced by the swirling muddy waters of a river in northern Italy. The Rubicon. It was a small river, insignificant in size, yet crossing it had changed the history of the world. Now he faced a divide of class and steel, a boundary enforced not by law, but by fear. He felt the weight of the decision pressing on his shoulders, the weight of civil war. To march was treason. To stay was death by starvation. The logic was simple. The choice was already made. He keyed his Voxcaster, the feedback whining briefly, before his voice rolled over the abyss, drowning out the governor's shrill demands. You speak of treason, Governor Caesar asked, his tone conversational, terrifyingly calm amidst the brewing violence. You who let the aqueducts run dry, you who let the grain rot in the silos, while the people ate their own dead, you call me a traitor. He took the first step onto the bridge. His boot rang against the metal, a solitary bell tolling the end of an era. "The Emperor protects Caesar," roared his voice, suddenly rising to a crescendo that shook the dust from the statues. "But you do not. You are the traitor. You have betrayed the Pax. You have betrayed the species." The enforcers hesitated. They were trained to fight screaming berserkers, not a man who spoke with the authority of a primarch. Caesar raised his hand, not in a fist, but in an open palm of command. He looked back at his legion, his criminals, his mutants, his soldiers. "The die is cast," he whispered the ancient Latin phrase, "alea iacta," as lost to the wind, but the intent clear as crystal. Then he swept his hand forward. Advance. For Rome. For the Imperium. The 10th Legion did not charge in a frenzy. They marched, left, right, left. The rhythmic thunder of thousands of boots hit the bridge, creating a resonance frequency that made the heavy bolters on the other side vibrate in their mounts. The enforcers opened fire. Bolts of explosive mass tore into the front ranks, blowing men apart in sprays of crimson mist. But the line did not break. As one man fell, another stepped into the gap, raising his shield. They marched through the fire, relentless, inevitable, a machine of flesh and will that would not stop until it reached the other side, or until the last heart ceased to beat. The Rubicon was crossed. The invasion of the heavens had begun. Chapter 6. Politics of the Spire. The gilded hall of the Spire had never known the stench of unwashed bodies, nor the metallic tang of dried blood. It was a sanctuary of stained glass and marble floating above the clouds, where the nobility of Aeterna Secundus dined on imported grox steaks, while the world below ate rats. Tonight, however, the music had stopped. The chamber orchestra sat frozen, clutching their instruments in terror. The great double doors, carved from the wood of extinct trees, had not been kicked down. They had been opened with polite, terrifying deliberation. Gaius Julius Caesar walked into the room. He did not wear the power armor of a space marine, nor the silk finery of a duke. He wore a simple flak vest, scuffed in gray, over his scavenged fatigues. A red sash torn from a fallen banner was tied across his chest, the only symbol of his rank. Behind him, the captains of the 10th Legion stood like statues, their lace guns slung, their faces hidden behind dust goggles. The gathered nobility heads of the merchant guilds, minor barons, and cousins of the governor shrank back, expecting the massacre to begin. They expected the Underhive King to demand their heads. Caesar ignored them. He walked to the long banquet table, picking up a crystal goblet of amasec. He held it to the light, admiring the amber liquid, swirling it gently. The sound of crystal chiming against a signet ring rang out sharp as a dagger drawn in silence. A vintage from the Equator Vineyards, Caesar noted, his voice calm, conversational. Production has declined 40% in the last decade due to sulfur rain. Yet here you drink it, as if the sky were clear. He took a sip, then set the glass down. Wasteful. Governor Hestia Vane stood at the head of the table, flanked by her household guard. Her face was a mask of crumbling powder and hysteria. "Guards," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Caesar. "Kill him. He is a usurper. He is filth." The guards did not move. Their eyes were fixed on the 10th Legionnaires, who stood with the relaxed readiness of veterans. But more importantly, they looked at Caesar. There was a gravity to the man, an aura of competency that the Spire had lacked for generations. "Sit," Caesar commanded. He did not shout. He simply gave an order that felt like a law of physics. The nobles, conditioned by centuries of breeding to obey authority, found themselves sinking into their chairs. Caesar walked slowly down the length of the table. "I do not want your heads," he said, looking each matriarch and patriarch in the eye. "Heads are useless on spikes. I want your ledgers. I want your ships. I want your manufactorums." He paused, leaning his hands on the table. You fear the mob, I control the mob. You want profit, the governor offers you stagnation. I offer you an empire. Treason, a minor baron whispered, though his eyes gleamed with greed. Caesar smiled a cold, wolfish expression. Treason is a matter of dates, he replied. If we fail, it is treason. If we succeed, it is reform. He turned to the governor's guards. And you? Your pay is 3 months in arrears. The governor buys wine while your armor rusts. Join me, and you will be paid in gold, not promises. Join me, and you become the Praetorian Guard of a new order. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then the captain of the house guard unholstered his bolt pistol. Governor Vane gasped in relief until the captain turned and leveled the weapon at her head. The governor is indisposed, the captain announced, his voice flat. Vane's scream was cut short as 2 guards seized her arms, dragging her away from the high seat. She kicked and wailed, a spoiled child facing the end of playtime. Caesar watched her go without a flicker of emotion. He walked to the head of the table, the seat still warm from the deposed ruler. He sat down, crossing his hands on the polished wood. The nobility watched him breathless, terrified, and utterly captivated. He was a monster, yes, but he was their monster now. Now Caesar said, signaling for a scribe to come forward. Let us discuss the grain tithe. The current logistics are an insult to intelligence. Chapter 7, Pax Aeterna. 6 standard months had passed since the coup, and Aeterna Secundus had become unrecognizable. The smog that once choked the lower hab blocks was now filtered through massive atmospheric scrubbers repaired by terrified tech priests working under the threat of decimation. The streets, once rivers of sewage and blood, were swept clean. Not by magic, but by the mandatory labor of every citizen. Idleness was illegal. Vagrancy was a capital offense. The Hive City did not sleep. It marched. The crime rate had dropped to 0 for the simple reason that criminals were now either soldiers in the 10th Legion or fertilizer for the hydroponic gardens. In the governor's solarium, now stripped of its gaudy tapestries and filled with rows of cogitators and scribes, Caesar dictated his legacy. He paced back and forth, the clicking of his sandals on the marble floor, the only sound besides the scratching of 100 quills. Servitors lobotomized to record every syllable, transcribed his words into High Gothic. He was writing commentaries on the Hive War. The nature of the Imperium is not faith, Caesar mused, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. It is logistics. Faith fills the soul, but bread fills the belly. A starving man cannot pray. Therefore, the administrator is the highest form of priest. The scribes shuddered as they wrote. To equate administration with divinity was bordering on apostasy. Yet the results were undeniable. The planetary tithe to the administratum had been paid in full 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The Munitorum ships left orbit heavy with lasguns and shells, the captains bewildered by the efficiency of the loading docks. Caesar stopped by the window, looking down at his creation. He felt the familiar warmth of pride, the hubris that had once led him to the Senate floor. He believed truly and dangerously that he could fix this broken galaxy. He saw the Imperium not as a holy domain, but as a Rome that had lost its way. Yet the most chilling change was not in the ledger books, but in the stone. In the plaza of the Ascendant, a new statue was being unveiled. It was ostensibly the God Emperor, the master of mankind. But the sculptors, seeking to please their new master, had altered the visage. The long hair was gone, replaced by a severe, close-cropped cut. The benevolent expression was replaced by a look of stony calculation. The aquiline nose, the sharp cheekbones, it was the emperor. But it was also Caesar. Pax Aeterna, Caesar whispered, looking at the monument. Look at them. No whips, no screaming. just the law. This is the Pax Romana reborn in the stars. The piece was a glass sculpture, beautiful and fragile, waiting for a hammer. That hammer arrived in the silence of the void. High above the geostationary orbit, space twisted and buckled. A ship emerged from the warp, its hull as black as the space between stars, adorned with skulls and the heraldry of the Inquisition. It was not a cargo hauler. It was a hunter-killer vessel, the light of judgment. Bridge sensors on Eterna Secundus screamed in alarm. The scribes in the solarium dropped their quills. Caesar looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw the new star in the sky, a star that brought not light, but an interrogation. Lord Imperator, a pale aide, stammered, rushing into the room with a data slate that felt heavy with doom. A vessel has hailed us. They do not request docking permission. They are demanding your immediate surrender. Caesar took the slate. He read the ident code, Ordo Hereticus, Inquisitor Valeria. He did not tremble. He did not flee. He simply straightened his toga, a garment of red silk he had commissioned to replace his rags. Let her come. Caesar said, his voice cold as the void itself. If she brings logic, we shall talk. If she brings madness, she will find that Rome does not kneel to ghosts. Chapter 8. Ideological clash, faith versus reason. The throne room of Eterna Secundus had been stripped of its Gothic excess. The incense burners were cold. The skulls of saints were removed, replaced by maps of the sector and busts of tactical theorists. In the center of this temple of reason stood Inquisitor Valeria. She was a figure of terrifying majesty, clad in power armor of Baroque design, a heavy rosette of the Inquisition hanging from her neck like a millstone of judgment. Her retinue, a floating skull probe, and a scarred arco-flagellant twitched in the shadows, waiting for the order to kill. You have committed the sin of innovation, Valeria announced. Her voice was not loud, yet it carried the weight of an orbital bombardment. She did not look at the maps. She looked only at Caesar, who sat on the governor's chair, not with a slouch, but with the posture of a judge. You have altered the sacred quotas. You have tampered with the holy hierarchy. You have dared to apply logic to the divine mystery of the God Emperor's domain. She stepped forward, the power field on her hammer crackling. Confess, heretic. Name the demon that whispers in your ear. Caesar stood up. He was a head shorter than the armored woman, a mortal facing a monster of dogma. Yet he seemed to fill the room. I see no demon, Inquisitor, he replied, walking down the steps of the dais. I see a city that works. Is efficiency a sin? Is competence a heresy? If your emperor is all-knowing, surely he prefers a weapon that fires to one that jams with prayer. He gestured to the open windows, where the hum of a functioning industry drifted in. Listen to that. That is not the sound of worship. It is the sound of victory. Valeria's eyes narrowed. This was not the raving of a chaos cultist. It was something far more dangerous, a competing ideology. Order without faith is tyranny, she spat. The Imperium is not a machine to be oiled, fool. It is a test of the soul. Suffering is our currency. By removing the suffering, you weaken the spirit. You make them comfortable. And comfortable men do not die for the Emperor. She raised her rosette. You call this order, I call it a breeding ground for complacency. You are not a savior. You are a cancer of reason in a galaxy of necessary madness. And you are a butcher of potential. Caesar countered, his voice hard. You glorify the rot because you are too afraid to cut it out. You call chaos sacred because you cannot control it. He stopped inches from her, staring into her cybernetic eye. You call order heresy. Then chaos must be your god, Inquisitor. The air in the room froze. It was a sentence that would earn anyone else an immediate execution. Valeria's hand tightened on her weapon. The tension was a physical pressure, a spark waiting to ignite a powder keg. I have the authority to burn this world to ash. Valeria hissed, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. I can declare exterminatus. I can end your little experiment in a heartbeat. Caesar smiled, but there was no humor in it. You could, he agreed. But look at your sensors, Inquisitor. My legion surrounds this tower. My ships block your exit vector. You can kill me, certainly. But you will not leave this room alive. And more importantly, he leaned in closer. If you burn this world, the tithe stops. And the High Lords of Terra love their tithes more than they love your dogma. Valeria froze. It was a stalemate. A checkmate in a game she didn't know she was playing. She lowered her hammer, but her eyes promised a fate worse than death. You think you have won, she whispered. But you have only rung the dinner bell. She tapped a rune on her gauntlet. I am not the only one who answers the call of heresy. I have summoned the angels. As if on cue, the sky outside turned red. Not from the sun, but from the contrails of drop pods burning through the atmosphere. The Space Marines had arrived. Chapter 9. Escalation, the Angels of Death. The sky above the Hive City tore apart as the drop pods of the Ultramarines descended like meteors of judgment. They were not subtle. They did not broadcast demands. They simply fell slamming into the plazas and spires with earth-shattering impacts that threw up clouds of pulverized concrete. The doors blasted open, and the blue-armored giants emerged, their bolters roaring before their boots even touched the ground. These were not men. They were biology written for war, the Astartes, the literal sons of a demigod. Panic rippled through the upper spires, but in the command bunker, Caesar remained icy. Hold, he ordered into the Vox, his voice steadying the trembling officers of the 10th Legion. They are strong, but they are few. We are many. Engage protocol, Elysia. He did not try to match the Astartes in strength. That was suicide. Instead, he turned the city against them. He lured them into kill zones. He collapsed bridges. He flooded corridors with promethium and lit the spark. On the Grand Avenue, a squad of Ultramarines advanced their movements, a blur of transhuman speed. A tactical Marine took a step, and the ground beneath him exploded, not a mine, but a shaped charge designed to drop him into the sewers below. Ambush, the sergeant roared over the Vox. From the ruins, the 10th Legion opened fire. Not with panic, but with the rhythmic volleys Caesar had drilled into them. Last fire, useless individually against power armor, became a cutting laser when focused by 1,000 barrels. The ceramic plates of the Astartes began to heat to crack under the sheer volume of fire. Caesar watched the tactical feed from a monitor. He saw a giant in blue tear a tank turret off a Lehman Russ with his bare hands. He felt a chill of genuine awe. Polyphemus, he muttered, referencing the Cyclops of myth. They are gods, but even gods bleed. He grabbed the Voxcaster. Do not engage in melee fallback. Draw them into the intersections. Use the heavy bolters on the joints. He was conducting a symphony of desperate resistance trading space for time bodies, for positional advantage. The Ultramarines' Captain Titus Severus halted his advance. He looked at the bodies of the traitor militia. They were not charging blindly. They were retreating in good order, covering their sectors using suppressing fire. This was not the work of cultists. This was military doctrine, codex doctrine. Brother Sergeant Severus growled over the squad channel. This enemy. They fight like us. Who is commanding this rabble? The realization was disturbing. The enemy wasn't just resisting, they were adapting. Caesar knew he could not win a prolonged engagement. He needed a parley. He needed to speak to the leader of these giants. He walked out onto the balcony of the governor's palace unarmed, holding a simple white flag. It was an archaic gesture, one that might mean nothing in the 41st millennium. But he had to try. "I seek the commander." His amplified voice boomed across the burning plaza. Below, amidst the smoke and the ruin, the massive form of Captain Severus turned. The blue helmet lenses locked onto the small, fragile figure in the red toga. The firing stopped. The silence of the grave descended once more. Chapter 10. The Parley of Kings. The ceasefire was a fragile thing held together by the mutual curiosity of two predators. In the center of the shattered plaza of the Ascendant, where the statue of the Emperor Caesar now lay headless in the dust, the meeting took place. On one side stood Gaius Julius Caesar, flanked by his two most loyal legates, scarred gangers, who now wore the red crests of centurions. On the other side stood Captain Titus Severus of the Ultramarines. The Space Marine did not bring guards. He did not need them. He stood alone, a towering monolith of ceramite and blue heraldry, his presence radiating a transhuman dread that made the air taste of ozone. Caesar looked up. He had to crane his neck to meet the glowing red lenses of the giant's helmet. The physical disparity was comical, a man of flesh against a demigod of war. Yet Caesar did not flinch. He adjusted his toga with the casual grace of a senator addressing the floor. "I have read your Codex Astartes, Caesar," began, his voice amplified by a vox bead to cut through the wind. "It is a derivative work, excellent on logistics, sound on deployment, but rigid. It lacks the poetry of improvisation. It reminds me of the Spartans, brave but lacking imagination." Severus removed his helmet. His face was a landscape of hard angles, skin the color of marble eyes, old and cold as the void. He looked down at the small man with a mixture of disgust and begrudging respect. "You speak of the Holy Tome as if it were a mere manual." Severus rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. "It is the wisdom of the Primarch. It is the law that holds the stars together. You little tyrant are a glitch in that law. You have organized the disorderly. You have fed the starving. And in doing so, you have challenged the ordained hierarchy of the Imperium. I challenged incompetence." Caesar snapped, his patience fraying. "I found a world eating itself, and I gave it purpose. Look around you, giant. The factories hum. The people do not cower in the mud. They work. Is this not what your emperor wanted? A dominion of mankind, strong and united?" He gestured to the smoking city. "I offer you a world that functions. I offer you a legion that fights with its brain, not just its blood. Join me. Or at least leave me to rule this rock in his name. I will pay your tithes. I will build your ships. Just remove your boot from my neck." Severus shook his head slowly. It was a gesture of profound pity. "You do not understand," the Astartes said softly, a sound like a distant avalanche. "The Imperium does not require understanding. It requires submission. You have committed the ultimate heresy. You believe you know better than the High Lords. You believe reason can save you." Severus placed his hand on the hilt of his power sword. "Reason is a lie. There is only war. My Primarch Robout Guilliman possesses a wisdom you cannot comprehend. He would see you not as an ally, but as a tragic error. A ghost from an age when humanity still believed it could master its own fate." Caesar stared at the giant, his mind racing through tactical options, finding only dead ends. Logic had failed. Diplomacy had died. "Then we are at an impasse." Caesar said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You are a slave to a corpse, and I am a free man on a dying world." He turned his back on the Astartes, a calculated insult. "Go back to your ship, Centurion. If you want my city, you will have to burn it down to the foundations. and know this Rome dies, but it never surrenders. Chapter 11. The Ides of March. The truce ended the moment Caesar crossed his defensive lines. The sky erupted. The Ultramarines did not play at war. They ended it. Thunderhawks screamed from the clouds, unleashing hellfire missiles that turned the 10th Legion's meticulously dug trenches into graves of molten earth. The phalanx formations, so effective against gangers and mutants, disintegrated under the mass-reactive fury of bolter fire. It was not a battle. It was an extermination. The 10th Legion died not with a roar, but with a wet, sudden silence as their bodies were blown apart by weapons designed to kill gods. Caesar retreated to the governor's palace, the heart of his short-lived empire. The marble floors were slick with blood and dust. He stood in the map room watching the red runes of his units blink out one by one. Gone. 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 The brilliance of his strategy meant nothing against the brute force of superior technology. He was a grandmaster playing chess against a man with a sledgehammer. "Sir," a voice called out. It was Marcus, his most trusted aide, a young man from the Underhive, whom Caesar had raised from a thief to a praetor. "The Astartes have breached the outer gate." Marcus reported, his face pale sweat streaking the soot on his skin. "We have lost the courtyard. The Legion is gone, Imperator." Caesar nodded, his face a mask of calm. He picked up a stylus and wrote a final entry in his journal. "They possess the power of Jupiter, but the minds of thralls." He turned to Marcus. "It is finished, my son. We shall meet them at the doors. We shall show them how Romans die." Caesar turned to retrieve his gladius from the table. He did not see Marcus draw the auto pistol. He did not see the tears streaming down the young man's face. He only heard the click of the hammer. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. Caesar froze. He turned slowly, looking at the weapon leveled at his heart. "Marcus," he asked, his voice betraying the first hint of genuine hurt. "What is this?" "The Inquisitor?" Marcus sobbed, the gun shaking in his hand. "She spoke to me. Through the Vox. She said, if I end the heresy, she will spare my sister. She will spare the sector." The young man's eyes were wild with the indoctrinated terror of the 41st millennium. "You are a heretic, Caesar. You denied the God Emperor. I have to save my soul." Caesar looked at the boy. He saw the fear that no amount of logic could cure. He saw the superstition that had strangled humanity. A sad smile touched his lips. He spread his arms wide, opening his chest to the bullet. "Then do it," Caesar whispered, his eyes piercing the boy's soul. "Et tu, brute, then fall, Caesar." The gun fired. Bang. A single pathetic shot that echoed through the halls of history. Caesar stumbled, clutching his chest. The red silk of his toga turned darker. He fell to his knees, not before the Emperor's statue, but before the map of his city. As his vision faded, he did not see the afterlife. He saw only the darkness of a galaxy that had forgotten the light. "I tried," he breathed, and then the man who would be king lay still. The doors burst open. The Ultramarines stormed in. Bolters raised only to find the war was already over. Chapter 12. Judgment and Legacy. The silence of the Macraga's honor was absolute. In the private sanctum of the Primarch, only the hum of the stasis fields could be heard. Robut Guilliman, the Avenging Sun, Lord Commander of the Imperium, sat at his desk. He was a being of immense power, yet his shoulders carried the weight of 1,000,000 burning worlds. In his massive, armored hand, he held a fragile object, a data slate recovered from the ruins of Eterna Secundus. It contained the scanned pages of a handwritten manuscript titled Commentaries on the Hive War. Guilliman scrolled through the text. He read the treatises on supply lines, so the diagrams of political maneuvering, the philosophical arguments for a secular, efficient state. The writing was archaic, the syntax belonging to a language dead for 40,000 years. High Gothic, yes, but pure, untainted by the degradation of the ecclesiarchy. Gaius Julius Caesar Guilliman whispered the name, testing its weight. He knew history. He knew the ancient texts of old Earth better than any living soul. You were early, Guilliman murmured to the empty room. Or perhaps you were incredibly late. He looked at the hololith recording of the battle. He saw the crude phalanxes, the use of basic geometry to counter Astartes' speed. It was brilliant. It was desperate. It was human. A pang of deep, melancholic regret struck the Primarch's hearts. If this man had been born in the 30th millennium, he would have been a High Lord. He would have been a hero. In the 41st millennium, he was just another heretic burned on the pyre of dogma. My lord, a chapter serf stepped timidly into the light. The Inquisition requests the final disposition of the traitor's remains. They wish to launch them into a star as a warning. Guilliman closed the data slate. His face hardened. The blue eyes of the Primarch flared with a cold, protective anger. No, he commanded. The Inquisition will be told that the body was vaporized. Secure the remains. Place them in the stasis vaults of Hera. The serf bowed low, terrified. As you command. And the data slate Guilliman placed the device in a drawer made of impossible wood, locking it with a gene-coded seal. It stays with me. There is wisdom here. Wisdom that this rot-infested galaxy is not yet ready to hear. Guilliman stood and walked to the viewport. The stars were cold and distant. He thought of the man who had tried to build Rome in a landfill. A man who had looked at the nightmare of the future and tried to organize it. Rest well, brother of the past, the Primarch said, his voice a low thrum in the darkness. We are both prisoners of this age. But you, at least you died free. On the reflection of the glass for a brief moment, the aquila on Guilliman's chest seemed to merge with the ancient eagle of a lost empire. The two-headed eagle watched the dark, eternally vigilant, eternally alone.